We have made commitments to the French people. We respect them. We rely on a solid track record and solid results. The unemployment rate is down by 3 points compared to the end of 2016. 1.7 million jobs have been created, and we have lowered the tax for the companies as well as for households. Whilst many tried to bring us to a standstill and bring blockages, the pace of reforms has not slowed down.
Well, that comes as Borne's boss, the embattled president, Emmanuel Macron, is emerging from months of protests against him and his move to raise the retirement age in France from 62 to 64. Well, to take this all apart with me now, let's bring in Andrew Smith in London. Andrew, thanks for speaking to us, as always. What do you think we'll see in these 100 days of apaisement, of peacemaking efforts that the Prime Minister was announcing today?
Well, he's going to hope that it's a little more successful than the Napoleonic 100 days. This is an attempt at a relaunch, which is designed to recognise where there have been problems, designed to show that the presidency is listening and to inject some energy into what right now seems to be really an administration which has stalled. It won its Pyrrhic victory on pension reform, but the worry is that it has burnt so many bridges in doing so, that it has raised so much public anger, that it has alienated so many potential supporters within Parliament and the Assembly and beyond, that really it will struggle to pass any further reforms. So this is a big relaunch. There are 4 pillars to the government's strategy on work, ecological transition, public services and justice and order. But importantly, one of the things we saw, really the headlines of the Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne's speech earlier today, was really the postponement of the big reform around the immigration bill. And I think that is a symptom of just how weakened the presidency is at the moment. 100 days to turn around the presidency, to relaunch the second mandate, but really difficult to see where some of that dynamism is going to come from, I think.
And the protests against Macron and his government are calmer, but they are still there. We saw a lot of people out banging pots and pans yesterday. Tell us a bit more about how the protest movement's evolving.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Again, we're seeing another big symbol of protest. We know, of course, we saw early on in the Emmanuel Macron's first mandate, there was the big yellow vest movement. That took an everyday symbol, something that everyone was forced to carry in their cars. It grew from a motoring protest into something much more wild and uncontrollable, but also kind of all-encompassing. Actually, this is something where we can see a similar kind of crystallization of protest around an everyday household object, something that people are drawing from their homes, everyday things that they bang, disrupt, create noise because they want to be heard. This seems like a dialogue of the deaf, where really the presidency is not listening. We see the government the majority is not really trying to curry favour, but instead forcing through its measures with these constitutional, sure, but really quite anti-democratic measures, like, of course, the very famous 49.3, which enabled them really not to try and build support for their reforms, but instead just to force it through. So I think this is something which crystallises once again popular dissatisfaction. Emmanuel Macron has record low levels in his popular support, and this is really the reason for this need to appease and to relaunch the second mandate. So I think it is quite important. There really have been mixed messages coming from government. On the one hand, we can see this idea with Elisabeth Borne's speech today. There's an attempt to listen and to show awareness. But we've also seen spokesmen like Gabriel Attal, of course, went down to the Hérault, where Emmanuel Macron had his appearance earlier on in the week. And we saw really this idea where he was saying, the people of France who are working don't have time to come out and protest in the afternoon on a weekday. Now, that's not something which is conciliatory. That's not something which is bringing people along with him. Emmanuel Macron, when he says, pots and pans won't build France's future, that's not something which recognises public anger, but instead tries to dismiss it as the rabble, as a noisy minority. And that's where I think that disconnect comes from. So really quite challenging to see a way around and how they can show an openness to responding to people's quite legitimate concerns about the substance and the method of the government's programme.
So just a few days from now, next Monday is May 1st, which is traditionally a big day of marches, strikes, rallies here in France. It is a bank holiday, so people can turn out. Do you think that people are going to turn out again against Macron, or do you feel like that marching movement is starting to wane?
Well, as we saw with the big intersyndical, the big inter-union movement against the pension reform, it really drew supporters from right across the union landscape. The CGT and CFDT and Force Ouvrière, of course, very key institutions which helped organise this. But we saw with those big marches, it moved beyond the unions themselves from membership into something that was a social movement, drawing in much broader sort of constituencies of people really quite frustrated with government policy. Now, as you say, we have this kind of focal movement. We have the unions mobilising and agitating to bring people out onto the street to say that the 1st of May represents an opportunity and, in fact, an invitation for the government really to listen to what the people are saying. I think it will be a very lively day on the streets. I think it will likely come down to hopefully some controlled policing. We've seen in the past some extremely heavy-handed policing coming from the CRS and the forces of order. And I think really this is the hope that if it is a lively day, if there is a lot of movement, a lot of protest, a lot of legitimate representations of popular anger with the current government's programme and its method of governance, that this will be met really in a measured and appropriate way by the forces of order. We're calling for calm policing as much as calm protests as well. And I think that's an important emphasis on this.
Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us, as always. Andrew Smith, thank you.
Thank you.